The polished marble floor of Robert and Eleanor's foyer felt like ice beneath my worn dress shoes. My shoes, a sensible pair from a decent department store, were the only things on me that weren't suffocatingly tight. The rented tuxedo chafed at my neck, a borrowed suit of armor I never asked for, a uniform for a war I was always losing. My name is Mark, and I was 51 years old, standing in my in-laws' mansion on the last night of the year, feeling as out of place as a nail in a jewelry box. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, a delicate contrast to the heavy, oppressive silence inside the house. The mansion was a monument to their success, a testament to a fortune built not on sweat and soil, but on stock portfolios and inheritance. Every object seemed to have a story of its own, a pedigree of wealth and status that intimidated me more than any person ever could. The crystal chandeliers in the main hall shimmered like frozen fireworks, casting an unforgiving light on the polished wood and antique furniture. The air smelled of expensive perfume, and the faint cold scent of winter mingling with the aroma of roasted lamb from the kitchen. My wife, Sarah, squeezed my arm, her touch a silent plea for me to relax. She looked beautiful in a deep blue gown, a color that made her eyes sparkle. She had a way of looking at me, a silent understanding that passed between us. That was my only anchor in this hostile sea. We had been married for 25 years. We had built a life together, a real life, one built on compromise and a shared, unpretentious dream. She was the daughter of this house, but she had chosen a life of her own, a life with me. "It's going to be a good night, Mark," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm. But even she didn't sound entirely convinced. She knew the script as well as I did. Her father, Robert, emerged from the crowd, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was a man who moved with the quiet authority of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. His suit was bespoke, tailored to perfection, a stark contrast to my rental. He gave me a cursory nod, a gesture so dismissive it was almost more insulting than a cutting remark. "Mark," he said, his voice a low rumble. He never called me son-in-law, never just Mark with any warmth. It was always a slight, a reminder of the chasm between us. "Glad you could make it. The caterers are just setting out the appetizers. Don't mind James. He's in the library, probably on a call." James was Sarah's younger brother, a partner in a prestigious law firm in the city. He was everything Robert wanted in a son, ambitious, sharp-tongued and successful by the family's metric. James's success was always the yardstick by which my own was measured and found wanting. I owned a landscaping business. We specialized in bespoke garden designs, stonework and perennial planting. It was honest work, and it had provided for my family for 2 decades. We had put our daughter, Emily, through college without a single loan. I was proud of that. But to them, I was just a man who played in the dirt. Emily, our daughter, came over to us then. She was 21, a bright and compassionate young woman. She was the one person in that house who truly saw me for who I was. Her eyes met mine, and she gave me a small, knowing smile. She was wearing a simple but elegant black dress, a quiet rebellion against the glitz of the party. "Hi, Dad," she said, and her voice was a melody of genuine affection. "It's crazy in here, right?" I felt a genuine smile break through the strained mask I had been wearing. "It's something, that's for sure." "Grandpa's already talking about his new project," she said, rolling her eyes with a hint of good-natured sarcasm. "The new wing on the house in the Hamptons. He mentioned something about needing a proper landscaper. I told him he should hire you." My smile faded, replaced by the familiar prickle of irritation. It was a well-meaning comment from Emily, a shield she often tried to use, but it only reminded me of their casual disdain. They wouldn't hire me, not because my work wasn't good enough, but because of some unspoken rule about mixing family and business, a rule that only seemed to apply to me. The night wore on, a slow, agonizing crawl toward midnight. I drifted through conversations with people who didn't know my name, who looked right through me even as they spoke. They were polite enough, but it was the politeness of someone speaking to a waiter, an impersonal acknowledgement of my existence. I saw James once from across the room. He was laughing, a confident, booming sound, surrounded by his friends, all of them in sharp suits, all of them talking about mergers and acquisitions and stock options. I found a spot near the large glass doors that led out to the back terrace. The snow was falling faster now, covering the meticulously manicured lawn and the stone path I had helped build years ago as a favor. The stones were still perfect, a testament to the quality of my work, even if they never acknowledged it. The cold from the glass was a welcome relief. It was a grounding presence in a room full of hot air and false smiles. Sarah found me there, her hand resting on my back. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. "Just getting some air," I lied. The truth was, I felt like I was drowning. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "It won't be long now, just a few more minutes." "And the toast," I added, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. The toast. The annual ritual of a New Year's Eve celebration, the crescendo of the evening, the moment when Robert would stand in front of everyone, raise his glass and give a speech. It was always the same. He would talk about the family's triumphs, their successes, their legacy. And every year he would praise James, and then he would mention me, if at all, in a vague and distant way, like a footnote to the main story. He would talk about how lucky Sarah was, how I was a good provider, a decent man. But it was always with a subtext of considering what she could have had. The thought of it was a knot in my stomach, the air filled with the quiet murmur of anticipation. People began to gather in the main hall, their faces glowing in the soft light. Robert and James were already at the center of it all, raising their glasses, their faces a picture of smug satisfaction. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 11:58. 2 minutes until midnight. 2 minutes until the moment I had dreaded all night. 2 minutes until I would be reminded in front of everyone of my place in their world. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The storm was coming, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The grand clock on the mantelpiece chimed, its brass gears a gentle hum in the expectant hush of the room. Midnight. A new year. Robert, with a theatrical flourish, raised his crystal flute. The liquid inside caught the light, a brilliant amber. He cleared his throat and the room grew silent. All eyes were on him, a patriarch holding court. I stood on the periphery, a ghost at the feast, watching a scene I had witnessed so many times before. My hand was in Sarah's, a quiet strength passing between us. "My friends, my family," Robert began, his voice strong and resonant. "Another year is behind us. A year of challenges, yes, but more importantly, a year of triumph." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He spoke of investments that had paid off, of new ventures, of the family's growing influence. It was a monologue of self-congratulation, thinly veiled as a toast. Then he turned to James, who was standing beside him with an easy smile. "And to my son, James, this year his firm secured the biggest merger in its history. He is a credit to this family, a man of vision and ambition. He reminds me every day of the importance of legacy, of building something that will last for generations." A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. James nodded, a practiced humility on his face. He knew his part in this performance. He was the golden son, the heir to the kingdom, and this was his coronation. My stomach tightened. The familiar feeling of being invisible began to creep over me. It wasn't a quick, sharp pain, but a slow, dull ache, a constant pressure that had been building for years. "He has the drive," Robert continued, his voice lowering with pride, "the kind of drive that separates the good from the great, the kind of drive that ensures a family name means something." I felt Sarah's hand squeeze mine. She knew what was coming. She was the only one in that room besides Emily who saw the real me, the person who worked 16-hour days, who built his business from the ground up, who paid his own way. But even her love couldn't shield me from this. Robert's gaze finally, briefly landed on me. It was a fleeting glance, one that passed over me as if I were a piece of furniture, and then moved on. The acknowledgement was less than a second, and it was colder than the snow outside. He was about to move on to raise his glass for the final toast, when someone, an old family friend, cleared his throat. "What about Mark, Robert?" the man asked, his voice a little too loud in the silent room. "Don't forget about Mark." Robert's head snapped back. He looked annoyed, as if a minor detail had disrupted his carefully crafted speech. He gave a thin-lipped smile. "Ah, yes, Mark, my son-in-law. A good man, a dedicated man. He runs a fine business. It's a solid business, a testament to hard work. Cheers to Mark and to Sarah. Now let's all raise a glass to the new year." He didn't mention my name. He simply said, "Mark." He called my business solid. The praise was so faint, so hollow, it was a greater insult than if he had said nothing at all. He had been forced to acknowledge me, and in doing so, he had dismissed me. He lifted his glass and the rest of the room followed suit, their faces a mix of polite indifference and genuine amusement. They were used to this. This was the routine. The king had toasted the prince, and then, as an afterthought, he had thrown a bone to the jester. The chorus of "Happy New Year" one rang out, but to me it sounded like a funeral dirge. My hand, still holding Sarah's, had gone numb. The knot in my stomach was now a full-blown ache, a cold, hard lump of humiliation. I had been made to feel like a lesser man, a footnote, a mistake. I looked at Sarah and I could see the pain in her eyes, the shame she felt on my behalf. She had a tear tracing a path down her cheek. That was the thing that hurt the most. Not what they thought of me, but the pain I saw on her face. James, my brother-in-law, clapped Robert on the back, a shared laugh between them. He gave me a brief, pitying look, a smirk that said, "You see? This is your place. This is where you belong." I let go of Sarah's hand. The glass of champagne I was holding felt heavy and useless. I wanted to smash it against the marble floor. I wanted to shout at the top of my lungs. I wanted to grab Robert by his expensive lapels and ask him if a man's worth was really measured in dollars and stock prices. I wanted to ask him if the family he had toasted was truly just a name on a piece of paper. But I said nothing. My throat was so tight, I couldn't have spoken even if I wanted to. I turned and walked away. I didn't care who saw me. I needed to get out of that room. I heard Sarah call my name, but I kept walking, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I walked past the laughing faces, the clinking glasses, the joyous celebrations. To them, it was the start of a new year. To me, it was the bitter end of a long, miserable night. I found a small den off the main hall, a quiet room with a roaring fireplace and a wall of bookshelves. It was a sanctuary from the noise and the celebration. I sat down on a leather armchair, the kind of chair that costs more than my entire landscaping truck. I put my head in my hands and let the silence wash over me. The humiliation was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest. I had been invisible for so long, and tonight I had been made to feel even smaller than that. The anger was a slow burn, but it was there, simmering beneath the surface. It was a righteous anger, an anger born of 25 years of being underestimated, of being dismissed, of being tolerated. I had always told myself it didn't matter. I had told myself their opinion was meaningless, but it wasn't. It couldn't be, because their opinion was hurting the people I loved, hurting my wife and my daughter, and that was something I couldn't ignore. The toast had been a final, crushing blow, a public declaration of my worthlessness in their eyes. But it was also a turning point. I had been silent for too long. My words, I realized, were the only things I had left, and tonight I would make them count. The den was a cocoon of mahogany and old books, a quiet sanctuary from the sterile chaos of the main party. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows on the shelves. The heat was a pleasant contrast to the chill in my bones. I slumped deeper into the armchair, the plush leather, a soft, unfamiliar embrace. The shame was a live wire, humming with a low, constant current. It wasn't just the public slight. It was the echo of 2.5 decades of condescension. I thought back to the first time I met Robert. Sarah had brought me home for Thanksgiving break from college. I was a scholarship student, working construction jobs in the summer to pay for my books. I didn't have a pedigree, just a dream and a lot of grit. Robert had looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my calloused hands. "So you work with your hands," he had said, a statement, not a question. It was the first time I felt the weight of his judgment. Over the years it had become a familiar routine. Every conversation was a test. Every success I shared was met with a polite but dismissive nod. When I started my landscaping business, he had said, "That's a nice little hobby, Mark. A man needs something to do to keep busy." He hadn't seen the long nights spent poring over business plans. The back-breaking labor of laying sod and building stone walls, the sleepless nights worrying about payroll. He had only seen the dirt on my hands. Sarah found me there, a silent figure in the dark room. She closed the heavy wooden door behind her, the sound a soft click that sealed us off from the world outside. She looked utterly defeated, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red. The tear she had shed in the main hall had left a faint trace of sorrow on her cheek. "Mark," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. She sat on the ottoman across from me, her knees pulled to her chest. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse. The words came out sounding tired, older than I felt. "Yes, it is," she insisted, shaking her head. "I should have said something. I should have stood up for you." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. I always hope that maybe this year will be different, that maybe they'll finally see you for who you are." My heart ached for her. She was a good woman, and she was caught between the man she loved and the family she felt obligated to. "They can't see me for who I am, Sarah," I said, the words heavy with resignation. "Because to them, I'm just a reminder of everything they aren't. I'm from a different world, a world they look down on." "That's not true," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew it was true. She had lived with it just as long as I had. "They love you, Mark, in their own way." "Their own way?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Their own way is with a patronizing pat on the head. Their own way is to toast to titles and accomplishments and pretend my life doesn't exist. That's not love, Sarah. That's tolerance." She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there, her head bowed, the silence between us filled with a familiar mutual sorrow. For 25 years, we had lived in the shadow of this family's judgment. We had accepted it, made excuses for it, told ourselves it didn't matter. We had built a beautiful, strong life together, and we had done it in spite of them, not because of them. But tonight, that silent arrangement had been shattered. I thought of Emily, my sweet, smart, kind daughter. She was the best of both of us, the poise and grace of her mother, and the quiet strength and determination of me. She had never been fooled by the trappings of wealth and status. She had seen the real things in life, hard work, honesty, and love. The thought of her witnessing her father's humiliation, of her being forced to endure this, was a fresh wave of pain. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," I said, the words a raw confession. "I can't keep coming here and pretending it's okay. I can't keep smiling and nodding while he treats me like I'm a servant. I won't let them do this to us, not anymore." Sarah looked up at me, a flicker of something new in her eyes. It was a mix of surprise and relief. She had been waiting for me to say this. She had been hoping for it. The years of quiet hurt had been wearing on her too. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The anger was still a quiet fury, a simmering heat beneath the surface. But for the first time in a long time, it felt good to feel something other than shame. The quiet fury was a source of power, a slow, building force that had been dormant for too long. It was the kind of fury that didn't make you lash out. It was the kind that made you wait, made you plan. I looked into the fire, the flames licking at the old logs. I knew I couldn't let this go. The quiet moment of being ignored during the toast, the public slight, was the final straw. It was a line that had been crossed. The years of emotional abuse, of passive-aggressive comments, had finally caught up to them. I had been a quiet man for a long time. But quiet men, I thought, were often the ones who had the most to say, and when they finally spoke, the world listened. I stood up, the old leather of the chair groaning in protest. I had been planning to leave, to go home and lick my wounds in private. But now a new resolve had taken root. I wouldn't leave. Not yet. I had one more thing to do, one more battle to fight. I would stay, and I would make them listen. I found Emily in a sunroom at the back of the house, a quiet space filled with potted ferns and the soft glow of a single lamp. The snow was falling in thick, silent flakes just outside the glass, a tranquil scene that stood in stark contrast to the emotional turmoil inside me. She was sitting on a wicker chair, scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed with concentration. When she saw me, she put the phone down immediately, her expression shifting from distraction to concern. "Dad?" she said, her voice low and worried. "Are you okay?" I sat down on a nearby chair, the wicker creaking under my weight. I took a moment to just look at her. She was my daughter, my pride and joy, the one person in this world who saw my struggle and understood it without me ever having to say a word. She was the one who would come home from college and ask me about the new clients, about the challenges of the business, about the things that truly mattered to me. "I'll be honest, Em," I said, and the words were a release. "I'm not okay. Not right now, anyway." She nodded, her eyes full of empathy. "I saw what happened," she said quietly. "During the toast, it was awful, Dad. I am so sorry." "Don't apologize, honey," I said, reaching out to take her hand. Her hand was warm and strong, a comfort I desperately needed. "It's not your fault." "I know," she said, her voice filled with a frustration that mirrored my own. "But it's not right. They just dismissed you, as if you're not the most hard-working, kindest person I know. As if you haven't given up so much for Mum and me. Grandpa and Uncle James talk about success, but they have no idea what it really is." Her words were a balm, a healing salve on a raw wound. Hearing her say it, hearing her validate my feelings, was more powerful than 1,000 apologies. She saw the truth, the core of the issue. "They've been doing it for years, Em," I said, a sigh escaping my lips. I just thought I was strong enough to ignore it. I thought it didn't matter. But tonight it just felt different. It felt like a public declaration, a statement that I'm just not one of them. Emily squeezed my hand. "Dad, you don't need to be one of them. You're you, you're Mark, and that's better than anything they could ever be. They might have money and big houses, but they don't have what you have. You built your life, your business, your family. You did it with integrity. They just inherited a name and a fortune. There's a difference." Her words hit me like a revelation. I had always been so focused on what I lacked in their eyes, the pedigree, the wealth, the status, that I had forgotten what I had built. I had a life, a real, tangible life, a business that employed people and beautified the world, a daughter who was a testament to my love and my values, and a wife who had chosen me above all else. They had a name, a house, money. But did they have true happiness? Did they have the kind of love and respect that Emily was showing me right now? I doubted it. "You're a good girl, Emily," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I had to look away for a moment to compose myself. I didn't want her to see me break down. "No, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "You're a good man, and you shouldn't have to feel like this. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to Mum. She's hurting too. You know that, right?" I nodded. "I know." "She tries so hard to make it work, but she's caught in the middle," Emily continued. "She loves you more than anything, but she also loves her family. She's afraid of causing a scene, of making things worse." "I know," I said again, my voice a little stronger this time. "But what if making a scene is what needs to happen? What if we can't keep pretending everything is okay?" Emily looked at me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I don't know, but I know this. You have every right to be angry. You have every right to feel hurt, but you also have the right to be seen. You should say something, Dad. Not to hurt them, but to make them understand, to make them see you." Her words were like a fuse. The quiet fury that had been simmering inside me suddenly found a direction, a purpose. I had been planning to run, to go home and hide from the humiliation. But Emily had shown me a different path. She had given me the courage I needed, the validation that this wasn't just a petty grudge, but a deep, fundamental injustice. This wasn't just about me. It was about our family, our dignity. "You're right," I said, the words feeling new and powerful on my tongue. "You're absolutely right." I stood up, and for the first time that night I felt a sense of purpose. The shame and hurt were still there, but they were now mixed with a new resolve. I would not be the quiet man who ran from a fight. I would not be the butt of their jokes, the punchline to their well-oiled toast. I would stand up for myself, for Sarah, for Emily. I would make them listen. I would make them see me. The confrontation was coming. I just didn't know how or when. But after talking to Emily, I knew that I couldn't leave without having it. The clock on the wall of the den read 1:30 a.m. The party was beginning to wind down, the sounds of laughter and music from the main hall now a faint echo. Sarah came back to the den, her face a mask of exhaustion and sorrow. She sat across from me, the silent question in her eyes. What now? Sarah, I began, my voice low and serious. We need to talk. Not about tonight, not about the toast, but about everything. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She knew this was coming. We had spent years avoiding this conversation, pushing it down, pretending it didn't exist. But tonight, the weight of it was too heavy to bear. For 25 years, I said, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. I have stood by you. I have loved you, and I have loved your family. I have tried my best to be a good husband, a good father, a decent man. And for 25 years, I have felt like I was on trial, like I had to prove myself to them. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I know, Mark. I know, I see it. Do you? I asked, my voice softer, but no less firm. Do you see how every compliment feels like a backhanded insult? How every time Robert praises James, it feels like a slight against me? How they've never, not once, treated me like a real member of this family? They do, she insisted, but the words were a whisper, a defense she was making for them and for herself. They have a different way of showing it. No, I said, and the single word was a revelation. No, they don't. This isn't about their way of showing affection, Sarah. This is about them seeing themselves as superior. It's about them not respecting me, not respecting the life we've built together. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. Look at us, Sarah. We've worked hard. We have a beautiful daughter. We have a life we built from nothing. We're not the kind of people who sit on inherited wealth and talk about investments. We're the kind of people who get our hands dirty. We're real. And tonight, they made me feel like all of that, like all of us, was a mistake. She finally broke, the dam of her composure bursting. She sobbed, quiet, shaking sobs that tore at my heart. I know, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I know. It hurts me too. It's a conflict for me, Mark. They're my family. I love them, but I love you more. And seeing them treat you like that, seeing you get hurt, it's unbearable. I don't know what to do. You don't have to choose between us, I said, reaching out and taking her hands. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to stand with me, to stand up for our family, to tell them that this isn't okay, to stop making excuses for their behavior. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, a new resolve forming in their depths. I can't believe they did that to you, she whispered. They didn't even mention your name. They didn't have to, I said, a bitter note in my voice. Their actions spoke for themselves. I took a deep breath and continued, the words coming now in a torrent, a dam that had finally broken. I've been quiet for so long, Sarah. I've let it slide. I've told myself it's not worth the fight. But tonight, I realized it is. It's worth the fight because of Emily. It's worth the fight because of us. They can't keep treating us, like this. Sarah nodded, a single, decisive movement. The tears were still on her cheeks, but her expression was no longer one of passive sadness. It was one of strength, of a new, fierce determination. What do we do? She asked. The words a silent promise that she was with me, on my side, for the first time in a long time. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I'm not going home. Not yet. I need to make them understand. I need to say what I have to say, not for revenge or for a fight, but for us, for our family's dignity. She reached across and gripped my hands, her knuckles white. I'm with you, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you. That was all I needed to hear. Her support was everything. It wasn't about winning an argument or a fight. It was about having my wife stand by me, not as a mediator between two warring factions, but as my partner. The confrontation with Sarah had been difficult, but it had cleared the air in a way that had been long overdue. It had bonded us in a new and powerful way. We were a united front now, and for the first time that night, I felt the familiar fear of facing her family ebb away, replaced by a quiet, powerful calm. The next morning, I would go back to that house. I would see them face to face, and this time, I wouldn't be silent. The night was a blur of restless half-sleep and a simmering anticipation of the morning. I had managed to catch a couple of hours of fitful rest on the sofa in the den, while Sarah slept in one of the guest rooms. I woke before the sun, the room still cast in a deep pre-dawn blue. The snow had stopped and a quiet stillness hung over the house. I made my way to the kitchen, where a few of the caterers were quietly cleaning up. They looked as exhausted as I felt, their movements slow and methodical. I grabbed a coffee, the warmth of the mug a small comfort in the cavernous, sterile kitchen. As I stood by the large window, watching the first light of day filter through the snow-covered trees, I replayed the previous night in my head. The feeling of being dismissed, of being told without a single word that I was not enough, had been a physical blow. But the conversation with Sarah had been a powerful balm. The moment she had said, "I'm with you," was the turning point. It had given me the courage to move forward, to face the demons I had been running from for years. The thought of going back into that house, to face Robert and James, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. My gut told me to get in the truck, to drive home, and to put this entire nightmare behind me. But a new voice, the one cultivated by Emily's honesty and Sarah's loyalty, told me to stay and fight. This wasn't a fight for pride, it was a fight for dignity, for the right to be seen and heard in the family I had been a part of for half my life. By 8 a.m., the house was starting to stir. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and a moment later James came into the kitchen. He was in a comfortable fleece pullover and sweatpants, holding a coffee mug. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise on his face. He hadn't expected to see me. "Mark," he said, his voice flat. "Didn't think you'd still be here." "I left something behind," I lied. The truth was, I hadn't forgotten anything. I had stayed on purpose. "Right," he said, a patronizing smirk on his face. He leaned against the counter, a silent challenge in his posture. "Look, about last night, you shouldn't take it so personally. Dad gets a little theatrical with his toasts. It's just how he is." The dismissal was just as hurtful as the one from the night before. He was trying to sweep it under the rug, to pretend it was a trivial matter, a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. It was a pattern, a lifetime of quiet neglect. "It's not theatrical, James," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's disrespectful. It's been happening for years and it's not okay." His smirk faltered. He wasn't used to me challenging him. I was supposed to be the quiet, good-natured brother-in-law who accepted his lot in life. He was used to me taking the high road, letting the comments slide. "Come on, Mark," he said, a note of impatience creeping into his voice. "It's New Year's Day. No one wants to rehash old arguments. Just let it go." "I can't," I said. "I can't let it go. Not this time." Just then, Robert came in looking refreshed and oblivious. He gave James a firm handshake and me a quick, distracted nod. He saw the tension in the room, the silent standoff between his two sons-in-law. "Morning, boys," he said, his voice cheerful. "What's all this about? Trying to put the world to rights before coffee?" "Mark's a little upset about last night, Dad," James said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing a minor inconvenience. "I'm telling him he needs to forget about it." Robert looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. He didn't want a confrontation, not with me. He wanted to go on with his perfect life, his perfect family, his perfect image. "Mark," he said, his voice taking on the familiar tone of a man talking down to a child. "It was a toast, it's over. There's no need to make a fuss." "It's not a fuss, Robert," I said, and the use of his first name seemed to startle him. I had always called him Sir or Dad. Last night was the final straw. It wasn't about the toast. It was about what the toast represented. It was about you and James making it clear in front of everyone that you don't think I'm good enough, that the life I've built is insignificant. The air in the room went cold. James looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise. Robert's face hardened, the cheerfulness of a moment ago completely gone. I could see the anger beginning to bubble just below the surface. He was not used to being challenged, not in his own home, not by me. "I think we need to talk," I said, my voice now completely steady. "All of us, and I think we need to do it now." I had the upper hand. For the first time, I had taken control of the situation. I had chosen the time and the place. I had walked back into the lion's den, not to apologize or to make excuses, but to stand my ground. I had come to say my piece, to make them listen. The long walk back to the house hadn't been a walk of shame. It had been a march toward a confrontation that was 25 years in the making. The den, the same room that had been my sanctuary the night before, now felt like a courtroom. The fireplace was cold, the morning light pouring in through the windows, casting long, harsh shadows on the faces of the men in the room. Sarah was there too, having come down to the kitchen after hearing the raised voices. She stood at the door, her presence a silent, unwavering testament to her support. I sat on the edge of the leather armchair, no longer slumping into its depths. My posture was straight, my hands clasped in front of me, the picture of a man with something important to say. Robert sat opposite me, his face a stony mask of barely contained rage. James stood behind him, arms crossed, his expression a mix of shock and condescension. "I'm not doing this, Mark," Robert said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is our home, this is New Year's Day, we're not going to ruin it with this petty argument." "It's not petty, Robert," I said, and for the first time I didn't flinch. "This is about respect. This is about family." James scoffed. "Family? You're the one acting like an outsider, Mark. Dad made a toast. It's a tradition." "A tradition of what, James?" I challenged, turning my head to face him directly. "A tradition of making me feel small. A tradition of reminding me and everyone else that I'm not as good as you are. Is that what your family legacy is built on?" He didn't have an answer. He looked at Robert, an uncharacteristic uncertainty on his face. Robert's anger finally broke through. "How dare you?" and he spat. "After everything we've done for you? We took Sarah in. We paid for her college. We helped you with a down payment on your house. We've always been there for you." I felt a quiet calm settle over me. I had been waiting for this. The moment when he would bring up the supposed favors, the moments of their so-called generosity. It was their way of holding my life over my head, a constant reminder of my perceived debt to them. "You didn't take in Sarah, Robert," I said, my voice still quiet. "You raised her. She's your daughter. And as for the money, you gave us a loan, and we paid every penny back, with interest. We paid our own way. We built our own life." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You talk about legacy," I continued, my voice now a steady hum of controlled power. "You talk about building something that will last. But what have you built? You built a financial empire. You built a reputation. But what about your family? You've made it a competition. You've created an environment where one son is held up as a shining example and the other is dismissed as a footnote. That's not a legacy, Robert. That's a fortress built to keep people out." Robert's face was a study in shock and disbelief. He was a man who had never been spoken to like this before. He was used to being the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of every conversation. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I stood up and walked a few steps closer, my movements slow and deliberate. "You said last night that James reminds you of the importance of legacy," I said, the words feeling heavy and true. "But all I heard was that you value money and titles above everything else. You toasted to your son's legal triumphs, but you didn't toast to the life of a man who has loved and cared for your daughter for 25 years. You didn't toast to the life of a man who built a business from nothing. You didn't toast to the life of a man who raised a daughter who is smart and kind and honest. You ignored all of that, Robert." I could feel Sarah's gaze on me from the doorway, a silent plea and a powerful approval all at once. I was saying the things she had been wanting to say for years. I was fighting for our honor. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said last night," I continued, my voice now a whisper but one that held the power of a shouted word. You called my business solid. You said I was a dedicated man. But those aren't compliments. They're a way of telling me that I don't belong, that I'm not on your level, that no matter what I do, I will always be the outsider. That's not what I meant, Robert said, his voice finally returning, though it was weak and unsteady. I know what you meant, I said, my eyes holding his. You meant that I'm good enough for Sarah, but not for you. You meant that my life is fine, but not great. But let me tell you something, Robert. My life is great. It's full of love and hard work and integrity. I don't have your money or your status, but I have something you don't. I have the respect of my wife and my daughter, and that, Robert, is a legacy that matters. The room was silent. Robert was stunned. James was pale, his arrogant posture gone, replaced by a look of bewildered defeat. For years I had been the silent figure in the background, but today I was the one holding court. I had brought the fight to them, not with anger and insults, but with the quiet, devastating power of the truth, and it had stopped them in their tracks. The final stand had been made, and for the first time, I felt like I had won. The silence in the den was a living, breathing thing. It hung in the air, heavy and thick with the weight of everything I just said. Robert, a man who had never been at a loss for words, was completely speechless. He just stared at me, his face a mix of shock and something I couldn't quite decipher. Was it shame? Was it anger? Was it respect? I couldn't tell. James, my condescending brother-in-law, finally broke the silence. That's ridiculous, Mark, he stammered, his voice lacking its usual confident edge. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. We all love you. It was just a toast. I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. Is that what you tell yourself, James? That it's just a toast? The words we choose, the moments we celebrate, they mean something. They show the world what we value, and last night, what your father valued was his portfolio. He raised a glass to money, to status, to titles. He raised a glass to everything he thinks is important, but he didn't raise a glass to love. He didn't raise a glass to loyalty. He didn't raise a glass to the simple, honest, hard work that built my life. He didn't raise a glass to the man who loves his sister more than anything. My voice grew stronger, the words a steady stream of truth that had been locked away for far too long. And you, James, I continued, you just stood there and reveled in it. You enjoyed the spotlight, the praise. You never once thought to say, wait a minute, what about Mark? What about the man who's been a part of this family for decades? You were so busy being the golden son, you forgot about being a brother. James flinched, as if I had struck him. He had always been so sure of himself, so untouchable, but my words, spoken without malice but with the full force of my conviction, were a weapon he had no defense against. He was a lawyer, a master of argument, but he couldn't argue with the truth. I turned back to Robert, the final, most important part of my speech still unsaid. I am not here to ask for your approval, I said, my voice softening just a little, but losing none of its power. I'm here to tell you that I don't need it. My worth isn't tied to your opinion of me. My worth is in the life I've built with your daughter. It's in the character of our child. It's in the satisfaction of getting my hands dirty every day and making something beautiful out of nothing. It's in coming home to a family that loves me for who I am, not for what I have. I took a breath, letting the words sink in. You think success is about what you can acquire. I think it's about what you can give. I gave my love, my loyalty, and my hard work to this family. And last night you showed me what you think that's worth, nothing. The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't being aggressive. I was simply stating a fact, a truth that they had been avoiding for years. And it was my quiet, simple truth that had the power to stop them in their tracks. It was the truth that humbled the arrogant and shamed the proud. Robert finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. I never saw it that way, Mark. I was just so proud of James. You can be proud of James, I said. But you shouldn't have to make me feel less so you can make him feel more. That's not what a father does. That's not what a family does. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It wasn't a hush of anticipation or a quiet of indifference. It was the silence of a truth revealed, of a mirror being held up to a family that had been living a lie. For years they had been the ones in control, the ones who dictated the terms of the relationship. But tonight, I had taken that control back. I had spoken my mind. I had told them who I was, not who they thought I was. And in doing so, I had not only stopped their conversation, I had started a new one that would be difficult and messy and maybe even painful, but it would be honest. And for the first time in my relationship with them, that was all I had ever wanted. The air in the den was thick with unspoken emotions. Robert was still sitting, a defeated look on his face, a man whose carefully constructed worldview had just been dismantled. James had turned away, his back to me, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. Sarah finally moved, her hand coming to rest on my arm, a gentle, powerful touch that was both a sign of support and a silent signal that it was time to leave. I looked at Robert one last time. "I don't want to cause a scene," I said, my voice weary but firm. "I just wanted to be heard for the first time." He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with 1,000 different emotions. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a man who had spent his life winning every argument, but this was a war he had just lost, and he didn't know how to surrender. "Let's go, Mark," Sarah whispered, her hand guiding me toward the door. We left the den, leaving the two men in a silence that was more damning than any accusation. As we walked through the now empty, quiet main hall, I felt a sense of release, a weight lifted from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. The humiliation of the night before was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't insulted them, but I had won. I had stood up for myself and for my family, and that was all that mattered. As we were walking out the front door, Sarah holding my hand, a voice from behind us stopped us. "Mark." I turned. It was Robert, standing in the doorway of the den, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "You're right," he said, the words barely audible. He looked at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. I never meant to make you feel like that. I was just so caught up in the world I live in. I forgot what was important." His apology wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a promise to change overnight. But it was a start. It was an acknowledgement. It was a crack in the fortress he had built. "It's a start, Robert," I said, and the words were all I could manage. "It's a start." He nodded, a single firm nod, and then he was gone, retreating back into his fortress, leaving us to step out into the crisp, cold morning. We walked to the car, the snow crunching under our feet. The air was clean and cold, and the sun, now fully risen, was casting a brilliant light on the blanket of fresh snow. It was a new day, a new year, and everything was different. Sarah and I got into the car, and for a long moment we just sat there in the silence. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. I looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, at the love that had been my anchor for all these years. "I'm better than okay, Sarah," I said, and the words were the most honest I had spoken all day. "I'm free." The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the unspoken understanding between us. We had been through a battle, and we had come out of it stronger. The family conflict wasn't magically fixed. The decades of condescension and neglect couldn't be erased with a single conversation, but a first step had been taken. A line had been drawn. From now on, things would be different. I would not be the quiet man who took the high road. I would be the man who demanded respect, and that in and of itself was a victory. 6 months had passed since that New Year's Day. The snow had long since melted, the ground had thawed, and my landscaping business was in the full swing of spring. Our lives had returned to a comfortable rhythm, but something had fundamentally changed. The air between Sarah and me was cleaner, lighter, free of the unspoken resentment that had been slowly poisoning our marriage. The change with her family was slow, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The first sign was a phone call from Eleanor, my mother-in-law. She called to ask about my business, not in a patronizing way, but with genuine curiosity. She asked about my favorite part of the work, and I told her about the satisfaction of watching a garden come to life after a long winter. She listened, and for the first time, I felt like she was actually hearing me. The biggest change came from Robert. He didn't call. He wasn't a man for long, emotional conversations. But a few weeks after the incident, a certified letter arrived at our house. Inside was a small, handwritten note. It was from him. It said simply, "Mark, a true legacy is built with your hands. I'm proud of you, Robert." He had also enclosed a small gift, a new expensive trowel, the kind with a polished wooden handle and a sharp forged steel blade. A small symbolic gesture, but one that spoke volumes. It was his way of saying he was sorry, of acknowledging my work, of showing me that he finally saw me. James was the last to come around. He didn't apologize, not in so many words, but his attitude changed. He stopped the veiled insults, the condescending remarks. The next time we saw them, he asked me about a difficult client I had dealt with, and he listened intently, a newfound respect in his eyes. The real triumph, however, was in our own home. The quiet dignity I had demanded from them had been cemented in my own family. Emily had never been prouder. She would often tell her friends about the time her dad stopped everyone talking. Sarah and I were closer than ever. The long-standing conflict had been an invisible wall between us, and now that it was gone, we were free to be a team, a true partnership. The climax of this new chapter came on a quiet summer evening. We were sitting on our back deck, the air smelling of fresh-cut grass and the roses I had planted years ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in a brilliant array of oranges and pinks. Robert and Eleanor, and even James, were there for a barbecue. This time it wasn't a lavish affair at their mansion. It was a simple, quiet gathering at our home, a testament to the new terms of our relationship. Robert was sitting in one of our worn, comfortable deck chairs, his posture relaxed, a beer in his hand. He was no longer the imposing patriarch. He was just a man, my father-in-law. He looked at our garden, at the meticulously arranged flowers, the stone path I had laid myself. "You know, Mark," he said, his voice thoughtful, "you have a real gift. This garden's, it's a living thing, a work of art." His compliment was genuine, stripped of all the condescension of the past. It was honest. It was from the heart. I just smiled and nodded. "Thanks, Robert." Later, after the barbecue, as everyone was getting ready to leave, Robert pulled me aside. He didn't say anything about the past. He didn't need to. Instead, he just put a hand on my shoulder. "Mark," he said, a simple, firm statement. And that was it. The word, spoken with respect and warmth, was the only apology I had ever needed. The story wasn't about a hero who changed the world. It was about a man who finally stood up for himself, and in doing so, changed his own world. The conflict wasn't about winning an argument, it was about finding my voice. My words had stopped everyone talking on that New Year's Eve, but more importantly, they had started a new, honest conversation. The chapter of my life as the outsider was over. The new one had just begun. A chapter about family, a chapter about integrity, a chapter about finally truly being seen.